Imagine a place where the sun doesn't set for nearly 2 months. No dusk, no dawn, just endless daylight, stretching hour after hour, day after day. Now imagine trying to keep a religious fast in a place like that. A fast that's supposed to begin at sunrise and end at sunset. But what happens when the sun simply never sets? This isn't hypothetical. This is real life for a small Muslim community living in Inuvik, a remote town in Canada's Northwest Territories, around 200 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. For decades, this community prayed, fasted, and practiced their faith without a single mosque to call their own. Their place of worship, a converted double-wide trailer, cramped, aging, never built to hold. A growing congregation, picture it, freezing winters that plunge to -40 degrees, summers with light that refuses to fade, and a tiny room where dozens of worshippers would squeeze in shoulder to shoulder during Friday prayers. Children sat in hallways, elders stood outside in bitter cold, waiting their turn. This wasn't just inconvenient. It was a community quietly asking the same question, over and over. How long can we hold on like this? Reaching Inuvik is still a major logistical challenge. Supplies arrive by highway, seasonal barges, air freight, and in winter, ice roads. It's one of the most isolated communities in North America, far from Canada's major population centers. So when this community dreamed of a real mosque, they weren't just dreaming of a building. They were dreaming of dignity, of a space where their children could learn their faith properly, of somewhere large enough that no one had to pray in a hallway or in the snow. But dreaming was the easy part. The real question was this: how do you build a mosque from scratch in one of the most remote, most disconnected places on the entire planet? This is where their story truly begins. Not with wealth, not with easy solutions, but with a community that refused to give up. And what happened next would become one of the most remarkable stories in modern Islamic history.
Once the Inuvik community made their decision, they were building a mosque. No matter the cost, reality hit hard. This wasn't just about faith and willpower. It was about money, logistics, and geography working against them at every turn. The math alone was daunting. Building materials in the Arctic cost far more than anywhere else in Canada, simply because of transportation. Every nail, every beam, every piece of insulation would need to survive a journey most construction projects never have to consider. And then there was the matter of actually finding a structure suited for extreme Arctic conditions, something that could withstand brutal winters and yet still be moved, piece by piece, across an unimaginable distance. The community reached out for help, but door after door offered sympathy without solutions. Small donations trickled in, but nowhere near enough. For a while, it looked like this dream, like so many before it, might simply die quietly, buried under logistics no one could solve. Then came a turning point that felt almost like fate. The Zebeda Tahir Foundation, an organization already known for building mosques in underserved communities, heard about Inuvik's struggle. And unlike so many others, they didn't just offer words of encouragement. They offered action. The foundation didn't just donate money. They found something almost poetic in its solution. A mosque structure prefabricated, ready to be transported as one complete unit. Instead of building from raw materials on freezing Arctic soil, an almost impossible task, the plan became audacious in its simplicity. Build the mosque elsewhere in a controlled environment, then move the entire building intact across the country. It sounds simple when you say it like that, but what this really meant was transporting a fully constructed mosque, walls, dome, prayer hall, and all, nearly 4,000 kilometers, across some of the harshest terrain in North America. Few mosque projects had ever faced logistical challenges on this scale. For the people of Inuvik, this was the moment hope turned into momentum. The foundation's involvement wasn't just financial support. It was proof that their years of prayer and patience hadn't been forgotten. But now came the hardest part of all, getting this mosque to actually survive the journey north. And what awaited them on that route would test everyone involved in ways they never expected. Moving a building nearly 4,000 kilometers is hard enough on a highway. Moving it through some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America is something else entirely. The journey began in the south, where the mosque had been fully constructed and prepared for transport. From there, it needed to travel north, through provinces, across rivers, over roads that weren't designed to carry a structure of this size. Every kilometer brought a new problem no one could fully plan for. The first major obstacle: bridges. Many of the crossings along the route simply weren't built to bear this kind of weight or width. Engineers had to study each bridge individually, calculating whether the aging structures could survive the load, and in some cases whether the mosque itself could even fit across without damage. One miscalculation, one bridge that couldn't hold, and the entire mission could stall, or worse, fail completely. Then came the roads themselves. As the convoy pushed further north, paved highways gave way to gravel, and in the final stretch to ice roads, temporary routes that only exist when the ground freezes solid enough to drive on. These roads are unpredictable by nature. A shift in temperature, an early thaw, even a single day of unexpected warmth, and the route could become impassable, stranding the mosque somewhere in the middle of the Arctic wilderness. And then the weather. Arctic weather doesn't follow convenient schedules. Sudden storms, whiteout conditions, temperatures plunging without warning. Every one of these could halt the convoy for hours, even days. The drivers weren't just navigating a route. They were racing against a narrow, unforgiving seasonal window. Wait too long, and the roads would become unusable until the following year. An entire year's delay just from bad timing. Every kilometer covered felt like a small victory. Every bridge crossed safely. Every ice road that held. Every storm that passed without disaster. These weren't just logistics being resolved. For the Inuvik community, watching updates from thousands of kilometers away, each milestone was a moment of held breath, of prayers whispered for safe passage. This wasn't just a construction project anymore. It had become something closer to an expedition, one where success wasn't guaranteed, and failure was only ever one bad decision, one broken bridge, one unexpected storm away. And after everything the community had already endured to get to this point, the question on everyone's mind was simple. Would the mosque actually make it home? After a journey that tested engineers, drivers, and an entire community's patience, the mosque finally arrived in Inuvik. For a town that had waited years through freezing winters, cramped prayers, and countless setbacks, this moment carried a weight that's hard to put into words. Piece by piece, the structure was assembled on its new foundation. Workers moved carefully, mindful that this wasn't just a building going up. It was the answer to years of prayers, finally taking physical shape. And then the moment the entire community had been waiting for. The community gathered for its first prayers inside the new mosque, a historic moment for every family who had waited so long for a proper place to worship. Today, this remarkable building is known as the Midnight Sun Mosque, the northernmost mosque in North America. For the people of Inuvik, this wasn't simply about having a bigger space to pray in. It was validation. It was proof that even in one of the most isolated corners of the planet, their faith mattered, their struggle had been seen, and their patience had finally been rewarded. Children who once prayed in hallways now had a proper place to learn. Elders who once stood in the cold now had shelter, warmth, and dignity. And as for that original question, how do you fast when the sun never sets? The community follows a set prayer and fasting timetable based on the timing of the nearest location with a normal day and night cycle, a practice recognized and used by Muslim communities across the Arctic and other extreme latitude regions. But this story carries a meaning that extends far beyond Inuvik, far beyond religion itself. At its core, this is a story about what happens when a community refuses to accept impossible as a final answer. Every obstacle, the extreme cost, the lack of resources, the brutal geography, the razor-thin transport window, could have ended this story before it began. Any one of these challenges on their own would have been reason enough to give up. Yet this community held on, not because the odds were in their favor, but because they believed the outcome was worth fighting for. And when help finally arrived, they were ready to meet it with action, not just hope. This is the story of the Midnight Sun Mosque. But really, it's a story about resilience, about how faith, patience, and the willingness to keep pushing forward can move something as massive and improbable as an entire mosque, 4,000 kilometers into one of the harshest environments on Earth. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories don't come from the biggest cities or the wealthiest communities. They come from the edges of the map, from the people who refuse to let distance, cost, or circumstance define what's possible. The Midnight Sun Mosque now stands as a permanent reminder of exactly that.